Bourgeoisie. Errol Goka again. Since the time we made Anatolia our homeland, we have been trying to settle, urbanize, Islamize, and finally modernize. But even a glance at the post-Republican population and settlement movements in Turkey will suffice to see that the process has not yet been completed in terms of the transformation from nomadism into sedentary, urban lifestyle, and that our society has many years ahead to become a modern, urban society. Since the latest statistics show that we are 93% urban now, and the remaining 7% village population is exposed to the same salvo of television and internet as in the city, and media having broken the peasant isolation, we are faced with a brand new social structure now. In the classical approach, the village is static, a center of peace, predictability, and stability, guaranteed by a culture and common sense distilled through millennia. It is a shock absorber and softener against volatile turbulences of cosmopolitan metropolises. Elaborating on transition, it is useful to record Errol Gungor's views on the importance of customs and traditions in human societies. Although it is slow in some and fast in others, customs and traditions change in every society. In fact, their easy and quick change is not good for society. First of all, easy and fast-changing behavior codes cannot be considered custom or tradition. The survival and continuation of society depends on the existence of common behavior codes among people. Since customs and traditions meet this need, they form the basis of society. Without them, we would have to rethink how we would behave in every next situation we encounter, and we would never be able to predict how others would behave in varying situations. People would not be able to live as a society in the absence of such common and permanent codes of behavior among them. Then the obvious question: what serves as the country's shock absorber if there are no villages or peasants anymore? When the common sense that the village has filtered through thousands of years disappears in a few generations, what is the regulator that will calm social storms? Two most important characteristics of the village are religion and tradition. Both quickly deteriorate in the city, losing their relevance in a few generations. At the metropole, what will replace these two pillars that uphold law and order in the village and act as a unifying force? The city is temporal. The village was spiritual. Leaving the spiritual lifestyle behind, the West had to build a new code of non-religious materialist morality for this world. The technological revolution, surplus income from imperialism, and distribution of welfare to social masses helped the Western society build its positivist code of modern ethics. In the 21st century, the advantages of the Western world are challenged by new rising powers, and we are not sure whether modern Western ethics can be instrumental in times of comparative economic decline. It has not yet been put to a stress test. The questions are the same for the Turk transforming from spiritual to Kantian ethics. In this process, what should be the modern glue? Common values and interests that will keep future Turkish generations, the future bourgeoisie, safe from disintegration and live in peace. Religion? Tradition? Kantian ethics? What does homeland mean? What do you mean when you say flag? For which common values or interests would you be able to motivate your youth to martyrdom? How will your education system, which alienates young people from their origins with the Deschamais tradition, produce answers to these questions? Religions have been the subject of psychological and socio-political debate for centuries, but the most overlooked function of religions is that they are the essence of identity. Even for an atheist Turkish ruler, the question is valid. What if I remove Islam from Turkish identity? Academic scenarios can be studied. An atheist Turkey? A Christian Turkey? A shamanistic Turkey? This question can be asked of any nation. For example, it is a fact that Ataturk won the War of Independence with the believers who rushed to martyrdom saying, "Allah, Allah." So did Turkish NATO soldiers in Korean War as well. With what non-religious motives would we win the war? A statesman, even if he is an atheist, has to keep alive the common values that hold the society together. He cannot attack the values of the society with childlike reactions. No power can annihilate millennial values overnight, and neither can it create new values overnight, especially if you attack existing values before a new one is formed. You will shatter the society. And our poor masses. How can you ensure their happiness in poverty and keep them away from rebellion? Addressing a question, one of the February 28, 1997 junta rebel generals, Chevik Burr, claimed that their will would soften if they sought the advice of sociologists. He did not need science in his narrow, naive world. He never realized that the Imam Hatip schools and the headscarf were then useful transitional tools that Anatolian Turks discovered with 1,000 years of common sense. As American journalist Robert Kaplan describes in his famous book, Ends of the Earth, while all shantytowns around the world were swamps of prostitution, drugs, and murder, those in Turkey were places of calm and tranquility, clean, quiet homes that cannot be entered with shoes, pious, safe, noble, clean, houses that smell clean and where there is no crime. Residents of those slums, with their millennial wisdom, found a practical shock absorber in their transition from village to metropolitan lifestyle: the government Imam Hatip schools. In doing so, their intention was not to save Imam children. The practical expectation was that those schools would protect their kids from the cultural shock of the city and the vices of cosmopolitan, metropolitan lifestyle. As we said earlier, at the metropole, religion and tradition fade swiftly, creating a sudden ethical void, and a new modern, secular code of ethics needs at least 5 generations to settle in. What we have in the process is the lumpen generations in confusion and psychological insecurity, sending kids to religious schools and women covering their heads with headscarves were all precautions of millennial wisdom to meet the sudden shocks of modernity and transition. In fact, it is impossible to escape from modernity in the global village. I saw an interesting example of this with a sterile observation on my trip to Kuala Lumpur in 2000. When I looked through the window of the hotel I was staying at, I saw a young girl in tight stretched blue jeans and a transparent short-sleeved blouse that showed the bra inside, but with a hijab on her head. Seeing that, I said to myself, Turkey in 10 years, and murmured, bourgeois Islam. Years later, in a television program in Turkey, when I conveyed my observation that the number of makeup wearers increased among our devout ladies, a politician from the late Erbakan era said, "You cannot divide Islam into a country Islam and urban Islam. There is only one Islam." Yes, Islam was one. The Weberian question was how the urbanized interpreted and lived Islam. It was how quickly modernity and materialist consumption engulfed our devout bourgeois. Yes, modernity shall swallow the metropolitan modern Muslim, and the emerging Muslim urban dwellers shall create their own Turkish modernity through evolution, not enforced, imposed revolution from the top, digesting global modern values and merging them with their historical values. They will indeed start watching operas, and other high taste too, shall soon be their lifestyles in a natural way. It already started anyway. Note: Turks did not start enjoying operas and Western classical music because it was imposed on the rural peasants with a revolutionary understanding. They learned to enjoy them because of the gradual urbanization and modernization. Lifestyles evolve gradually. Modern politics. Let's now examine why the AKP, in the tradition of the Democratic Party, keeps receiving the majority of the votes from our poor masses, while only a small percentage vote for CHP, the representative of bureaucracy. Balkan and Arab peoples did not experience the same problems as Turkmen and Alevis during the Ottoman era. Contrary to claims that Turkmen revolts were made by religious heretics, the Selali and Satay uprisings were social uprisings against political corruption and the deterioration of the economic order. People with a basic understanding of history will acknowledge that the democratic uprising of the Anatolian people today against the military-civilian bureaucracy is, just like in the past, a conflict between the ruling center and the periphery with roots in socioeconomic problems. In history, the rhetoric was the heretics. Alarm bells rang to save the Caliph Sultan from heretic uprisings. In the Republic, this time, the rhetoric, saving Ataturk's secular republic. Any intellectual who could comprehend his aspirations would know that Ataturk was with the periphery, with the Anatolian Turks, rather than with the Deşirme rulers. It should not be forgotten that as soon as Ataturk closed his eyes, the Deşirme Unionists resumed their historical role that had been suspended during Ataturk's time. Taking the opportunity, it would be helpful to briefly discuss the Selali and Sutey uprisings against the Deşirme government. As feudal Europe was living its Middle Ages with internal strifes, Ottoman Empire was expanding. Turkmen were migrating from Asia to the Balkans, Janissaries were engaged in conquests, and the empire was experiencing a boom in economic activity. Suleiman the Magnificent's rule, however, marked the beginning of warning signs in the budgets. Within 30 years of Suleiman's passing, social unrest started as a result of the end of conquests and the loss of income from conquests. Pay cuts for the Janissaries led to coups, corruption in the military, and eventually oppression and heavy taxation of the periphery, the Anatolian Turkmen populace. Come Machiavelli's counsel. Should the subjects or the army be satisfied in difficult economic times? Of course, the army was the automatic response to the query. The sultans were now at the mercy of the army thanks to Fateh's Deşirme system. Similarly, Istanbul's economy received much higher priority than the provinces. Deşirme Janissaries, the bureaucracy, and Istanbul merchants were exempt from paying taxes, while Turkmen suffered heavy taxes. Additionally, the order was broken. The tamars that had been given to the Turkmen sipahis in the Rising Age were now given to the Istanbul bureaucrats and Janissaries, and as a result, discontent led to an increase in Turkmen rebellions. The focus was on Istanbul and the Balkans as the empire developed mainly into a Balkan state. More importantly, the Deşirme slave rulers were never embraced by Anatolian Turkmen or Turkmen aristocratic families. There was mutual distrust and abhorrence between the two. Due to this, the Balkan uprisings in the 16th and 17th centuries were not as violent as the Anatolian uprisings. The Arab regions of the empire were not as unsatisfied as the Anatolian Turkmen either, and their uprisings were not as violent as the Anatolian Turkmen's response. As conquest ended, economic conditions worsened and corruption rocketed. Heavy taxation forced peasants to either migrate to major cities, overcrowding them, or escape to the mountains. Commanders in the periphery began to organize gangs of unemployed youths as bandits, first for self-defense and later for banditry. The atmosphere was ripe for Selali revolt. As already pointed out, poor Christians of Europe sent their hungry kids to churches. Poor Turkmens sent their children to religious lodges to be fed, and the unemployed religious student graduates began to band together and organize Sutey rebellions. As a result, Anatolia lost order. Agriculture collapsed during the Great Escape from Villages period. Taxes decreased, and the state's economic crisis fueled the Deşirme rulers' growing corruption. The non-Muslim slave system collapsed after the reign of Murad III, who started incorporating Turkmens into the Janissary core, and then during the reign of Mahmud II, who abolished Janissaries in the 19th century. The inflated Janissary numbers reached 300,000. On the other hand, the main Ottoman army, Anatolian Sipahi system, was weakened as the effective Timur fief system maintaining them was ruined, leaving its place to feudalism. Professor Halil Inalcik says the Ottoman Empire rose by defeating feudalism and fell when feudalism defeated it. Here, the strengthening of the regional notables in the 18th century may have led the way to an Ottoman aristocracy and bourgeois class. Ottoman neo-feudalism was not, however, conducive to a European style of modernity. Ottoman state philosophy was not eligible for transformation from an economy of conquest and agriculture to a modern economy. In other words, the Deşirme class was unmatched until the AKP era in the 21st century. Historically, the eastern region of the empire, Kurdistan, which was typically mountainous, was an exception to the system. Of no particular economic value, Ottomans purposefully left the region to a feudal administration of its lords. Republic, empowered by means of modernity, plus the terrorist organization PKK, upset the feudal order in the region. A chaotic transformation led to instability, and the region became vulnerable to foreign manipulations. In conclusion, AKP led a democratic revolution that brought the millennial periphery to the center and overthrew the Deschamais military bureaucrat administration. In the 20 years of its reign, it has established its own bureaucracy, sharing its own values. Now alienated Deschamais bureaucrat is gone. CHP has lost the class it has been representing. Can CHP depend on the big Istanbul capital, which was the second leg it stood on? Not much chance, as AKP evolves into a Muslim liberal party of Turkey, and Istanbul capital changing course and blinking eye to the AKP. In such outlook, we may say CHP is now an anachronic political entity without a base to represent, without a mission. Küçükömür again. İsmet Pasha, the final bureaucrat to the left of the center, correctly realized the necessity of a political coalition of Turkish bureaucracy with both domestic and foreign capital for balance and peace in the country. In countries like ours, some think of these bureaucrats still having relevance in historical state apparatus. As already mentioned, historical discord exists between the Deschamais representative CHP and the Turkmen periphery. This discord also involves Kurdish and Alevi history against Ottoman Deschamais rule. The intriguing question is how the Deschamais-Alevi dispute, which had a significant impact on Ottoman history, changed into the Deschamais-Alevi alliance in the Republic. Why, despite historical evidence to the contrary, do some rural Turkmen, Kurds, and Alevis support CHP? At this point, we may surmise that the classical Young Turk message of CHP, the Western secular lifestyle, and modernity against Sunni practices, appeals especially to Alevi masses who have been discriminated against by historical Sunni Deschamais rule. Ottoman Sunni oppression versus the Republican secular worldview. Such a worldview has also appealed to the awakened lumpen masses thirsty for material possessions and open to materialism. It is natural that the Western world and its powerful local compradors will use all available resources to support this message. Let's make a prediction for Turkish politics in the future. The AKP is evolving to modernity in a similar trend as European Christian Democrats. However, the left is bare. In actuality, the AKP's social policies fill that gap. As so-called Anatolian tigers, businessmen of the periphery open to global commerce and seek sync with Istanbul and global big capital. And as AKP starts blinking an eye to this sync, we may head for a conjecture. AKP, like European Christian Democrats, may proceed to become the capital-friendly liberal right party of Turkey. And the candidate for the left? Of the have-nots. The great, century-old political joke of Turkey was the pretense of CHP to be the party of the oppressed against the ruling Deschamais elite and Istanbul capital. In its historical Young Turk mission and world outlook, it was so alienated from the culture, the religious understanding and traditions of the masses, that it was impossible to be the representative of its historical other, the underdog. If not AKP, if not CHP, who is the candidate? Let us do some social engineering here. Logic says the Turkish left shall have to share the values and traditions of the underdog, including Islamic colors. Meaning? Probable fission in the AKP. Like Democrat Party of the 1940s, budding off from its mother CHP, the potential Muslim left party may bud off of AKP after the last term of Recep Tayyip Erdogan as president. Devout and impoverished Muslims who could not share the benefits that AKP new business enjoyed may opt for a new party. Or else, Yeniden Refah Party of Necmettin Erbakan's son, Dr. Fatih Erbakan, may opt for such a mission, inviting the unhappy politicians of AKP and its voters too after Erdogan. And if they can succeed, they would be my future preference. Those who do not establish roots in people's values become rootless and would lose their mission. Turkish left must therefore respect the common values of the populace. A historical lesson of Turkish democracy: the Turkish left of the 1960s had no shared values with the oppressed it claimed to represent, and paid dearly for their estrangement from the realities of Turkey. To say again, in the near future, the rising Anatolian capital and the capital of Istanbul may come to an understanding on a reasonable point and enter into a union of interests. Again, these two main parties, the HDP or a successor party representing one part of the Kurdish population, will continue to exist as the reality of Turkey. As for the CHP, although the historical déchirement it represented has disappeared, it is possible and beneficial for this party to continue with a 10% vote rate, with the memory of 1,000 years of nostalgia and genes of statehood. The USA, catalyst of the Turkish Democratic Revolution. The USA, as we previously stated, meticulously studies its target nations like insects under a microscope. The world's top universities, specialists, and intelligence analysts all hail from the United States, but the executive decisions are made by the politicians, and politicians make mistakes. And as Joe Biden confessed, they made a grave strategic error in the grand plan to topple AKP from power. They never calculated the unintended consequences of failure. To start with, the USA, with great accuracy, saw the Achilles heel of Turkish society and worked on the historical political schism between the ruling déchirments and the ruled. As we said above, for déchirment bureaucrats, conservative parties were the Islamist religious fanatics who were the enemies of Ataturk's revolutions. And the USA figured out that the pious Muslims needed a savior from the oppressing laicist bureaucracy. And FATO was the most successful operation in the USA. When the July 15th, 2016 unsuccessful military coup came, it was too late. Yes, the coup was the result of the most successful intelligence operation in human history, but luckily, it failed. And the unintended consequence: even the best minds of the USA could not calculate that the failed coup d'etat would lead to a democratic revolution that would end the 1,000-year-old déchirment regime. They never thought that they would trigger a popular revolt that would root the generals to their barracks forever, and that they would never dare stage a coup again. The USA, which expertly manipulated Ataturk and laicism in the déchirment military-civilian administration, failed at one point and unintentionally sparked the Turkish Democratic Revolution. Due to this revolution, the army was forced to retreat to its barracks, and the populace vowed to shed blood in order to ensure that the juntas were never allowed to control the governments they chose anymore. And Turkish history opened a bright new page after closing the 1,000-year-old déchirment story. This was a millennial, historical revolution, and a real celebration. This was the end of a millennium of military bureaucratic rule, and it was the USA that triggered it. Presidential system. The symbolic president. A constitutional sultan. When Ataturk overthrew the sultan, the déchirment bureaucracy became like a rooster with its head severed. After Ataturk, they made an effort to hold on to power with national chief İsmet İnönü. Later, with presidents from military juntas. Fake sultan presidents could not succeed. A soldier gets his stars by deference and getting orders. If such a formatted man becomes the autocrat, who shall he turn to get orders? Many junta leaders got their orders from the USA. In the old system, the USA could blackmail or intimidate a few generals or party leaders behind closed doors to elect the man they wanted as president. A president elected by a few to be intimidated or bought, versus a president directly elected by the people. A politician tested through decades and known even to his private psychological details. Whether he is intelligent or mentally ill, democracy allows the public to know him. Turkish voters, with the exception of a few, never knew the presidents who were elected by their representatives in the parliament. With Erdogan elected directly by the grassroots, we now have a precise example of clashing interests. Biden, in his TV interview, realizing he is not able to topple him, says he wants to bring Erdogan down in a democratic way by supporting the opposition. But he does not want Russia or China to do the same to the USA. If Erdogan was to be elected by the parliament, other manipulations to block him, as in the past, may have been available. That is why we see the American and European press and the elites cry for a parliamentary system in Turkey. Now, let us talk about the evolution of European democracy. Feudal lords, the Vatican, and kings. Checks and balances of the three contending powers. Then comes capitalism, followed by social justice, the agreement to divide the excess profits that the capitalists make from global exploitation with the working class. Then duel for the colonies, and the suicide of Western civilization with two ruthless world wars. Then comes fatigue, and the culture of reconciliation as European nations grew weary of fighting one another. Wisdom gained through perpetual warfare. Come political culture of conciliation and coalitions. Turkish democratic process, hailing from Ottoman tradition, strict political centralism. Selali revolts aside. The state is the despotic father. Ethnic and religious groups are like children cohabiting peacefully with the fear of their despotic father, never maturing to learn the politics of how to bargain and reconcile when the authority is absent. No culture of political consensus. Hence, there is a natural need for leader-based politics. Party leaders could not be primus inter pares. They could not be replaced. They were elected for life. Lifelong leadership in all fields, worker unions, commercial and industrial chambers, political parties, civil society groups, and the like. Success and prosperity in politics depend on loyalty rather than merit. Party leaders appoint possible deputies and place them into electable positions in elections. After elections, those deputies elect the party leaders who appointed them. In such a parliamentary system of appointed deputies, they raise their hands when ordered to do so. Then comes the presidential system, where the cabinet is appointed by the president, not from deputies, but like the American technocratic presidential secretaries of the state, loyal to the president. And the door opened for a parliament to evolve into an organ of deputies with more liberty to control and impose their free will on the presidential government. Republic. The father figure state continues during the time of Ataturk and his successor İnönü. 1950 elections. A test of political bargaining and reconciliation between Deşirmes and awakening periphery. Failure. America instigated a military coup in 1960. Prime Minister Menderes and 2 ministers were hanged. Janissary tradition continues. To control the democratically elected parliament, the Constitutional Court was founded. High Administrative Court empowered to control governments. Justice mechanism, a historical branch of Deşirme bureaucracy, not protecting people's rights against the state, but of the state against the grassroots. Generals realized they could not force people to vote for their representative CHP, hence the era of coalitions. Years of social and economic unrest, military coups every 10 years. Then, in the 21st century, comes AKP. The Constitution was changed to a presidential system. The nation experiences a period of stability. Every sector of the economy experiences rapid growth. Infrastructure accomplished. The Republic enters a new age of modernity. If we go back to the Ottoman system, the Sultan and the Deşirme bureaucracy dominate the political system. Ottoman political contract with Reaya. I will give you justice and security. I will not interfere with your lifestyle, no matter what your religion or disposition is, and you will not get involved in politics. Yet, the Turkmen is unruly. The tension between Turkmen and Deşirme is the reality of Ottoman political history. There are no feudal lords or Vatican-type free clergy in between, forcing the central authority to a culture of political consensus. the people are so politically worthless in the eyes of the state that it was not even necessary to seek reconciliation with them. Political culture has never been developed among the people, so there is a grassroots consensus. In a society where there is no culture of political consensus, the success of coalition governments is an illusion, even oblivion. The Turkish people, with common sense, have decided on the presidential system, which conforms to their own character and is commanded by their political culture, which has continued since the Ottoman Empire. This is what fits the nature of things, and with this system, the country has stabilized and made great leaps forward. Is the establishment of a culture of political consensus in Turkey a dream? Is the practice of European coalitions a good thing? Can the Western world maintain a culture of compromise and coalition if it loses wealth? Can the Turkish commercial bourgeoisie develop, gain a win-win consensus culture between businessmen and the public, and reflect it in politics? It is possible. However, it is doubtful whether the coalition power can prevail over the presidential system, which hails from a 1,000-year-old tradition. Changing roles. In the 1940s and 50s, the teacher at the school, the commander in the military, the police at the police station, and the doctor in the hospital used to beat ordinary citizens. The Ottoman saying for the parents who gave their children to the school would say, "His flesh is yours, bones are mine." Parents give teachers a blank check to beat their kids to educate them. Bastinado was also used as a training method for unruly kids. Such violence continuing in many fields in the early republic was considered very normal in those days. Acceptance of violence by the peasantry was the result of the learned helplessness of the peasants against the bureaucrats who were recruited from their very village. Come 21st century, 93% of the population is urban. First modernization starts in police organization. A revolution in the field of human rights started in Turkey with the abolition of torture in police stations and the right to call a lawyer immediately with a transparent police station. In line with urbanization, compulsory military service, conditioning the peasant to fear the state by the military, ends. Armed forces start hiring permanent soldiers on salary, and compulsory service turns into a short voluntary one for a certain fee. As a police grandson, I can say that centuries-old practice did not disappear overnight. The police, who made the thief talk by beating him and warning him, "Do not fall into my hands again," so that he would not steal again, showed his reaction against the new laws by being offended. How will this work without beating? It took a long time for Turkish police to learn modern security techniques. Today's police organization has proven itself in terms of democratic and humane methods. We can claim that Turkish police are more conscientious and more humane than many Western countries, including the USA. We're talking about a cop who doesn't draw a gun, even when some bully punches him. Another characteristic of the Turkish police is that despite being one of the main actors in the exercise of state power, it is the bureaucrat class that is most accessible to the general public. Culturally, it has never broken away from the values of its roots, has never been alienated, and has always been intertwined with its people. Police college has never been a décharmé school like military, political science, and medical schools. For this reason, it has been the forerunner in modern times of the fusion of the people and the state, and the people have quickly embraced the humanitarian police with full heart. It takes a much longer time for the other bureaucratic institutions to approach the concept of human rights. The young bureaucrat sitting on the other side of the table continues to see himself above the people he came from, with a historical reflex. 93% urban today, the villagers' ingrained helplessness and fear vanish, even being replaced by the urge to exact revenge on bureaucracy for its historical sins. The clearest illustration of this can be found in hospitals. The young government doctor still uses the familiar pronoun singular you, sen, when speaking to the elderly patient, seemingly unaware of the fact that he is a servant of the taxpayer. Yet, on the other hand, the peasants broke from state fear, but had not yet attained the level of bourgeois respect for one another, and without manners, used unacceptable, even criminal assaults on doctors. Both parties need to learn to respect each other in a short time. Before closing the issue, it is useful to mention white-collar lumpens working in areas where there is high demand in the private sector. They can also enter the commanding psychology of government officials when they have authority. Capitalism mandates that satisfying the customer is essential for sales. With this obligation, they will soon learn to respect humans the hard way, because if the company loses customers, they will be kicked out the door. Nowadays, big companies, as well as many government services, follow up with their employees by asking customers whether they got good service from their servants. Turkish society is in swift transformation in human rights. The unclaimed state. Regardless of what anyone says, the Republic is undoubtedly a revolution in Turkish history. With the Republic, Turks turn for the first time towards a civilizational objective that emphasizes equality and solidarity, not only for themselves, but also for everyone with whom they share a common world. We must, therefore, have more deliberation on Turkish modernization. Currently, our nation is going through a very delicate transition. As the state transitions to new ownership, historical class conflict causes significant harm to the state. The rising Anatolian bourgeoisie, with the first revolution of the new millennium, seized control of the state from the Deşirme bureaucracy. With a sense of victorious confidence, yet with some psychology of historical inferiority, the Turkmen approached the defeated Deşirme with tolerance. On the other hand, the Deşirmes, in a psychology of defeat, are in a fierce assault against the victors. They mock and insult the emerging Anatolian bourgeois, their lifestyle, and cultural differences. Natural human reactions for psychiatrists to work on. Yet, we should also be aware of a potential backlash. Victory fosters generosity, and those who seize control of the state exhibit this maturity. However, it is also possible that some among the victors may act with a spirit of millennial vengeance. The real threat to our sense of national unity may come from feelings of vindictiveness, accusations and denigration of the westernized Deşirmes for being rootless aliens. Let's now discuss Professor Vahmik Volkan's expertise on social trauma as a result of victimization. Vahmik Volkan starts the subject with the concept of basic trust. He tells about the child's trust in his caregiver, and then this trust develops with the environment and turns into self-confidence. He explains that the trauma of victimization, on the other hand, is that the sense of trust is destroyed by heavy pains that the individual or society cannot cope with, and that the repair will be mourning, that is, by revealing and confronting the pain rather than confining it to the depth of the soul. He says that if the psychological poison is not brought to light and split, unresolved, unhealed traumas are passed on from generation to generation, and that it is difficult to achieve social peace without understanding and to resolve the hidden psychological processes of societies inheriting trauma. The legacy of apartheid in South Africa depicts Black children adjusting to continuous trauma and accepting their fate, while adults turn their uncontrollable feelings of despair and retaliation onto themselves. This example may help us understand the lumpen's self-hatred and his desire to identify with his historical oppressors and join them. It would be worthwhile to examine Raya's historical sufferings, inherited by the Republic's peasants in light of Volkan's method. Perhaps conditions may be created for the victimized Turkmen, Kurds, Alevis, and pious Muslims to grieve. It might be helpful to bring the subconscious poison of the populace to daylight and alleviate it. Likewise, the Deşirme who lost his throne with the Anatolian Revolution must also mourn, because losing his millennial power is an even more severe trauma. The time has come for these issues to be seriously studied by our social psychologists and psychiatrists. Society will not find peace unless the toxic feelings that have been suppressed in psychological depths are brought to light and healed. There is reason to be optimistic about social peace. We said that the rising Anatolian bourgeois will create its own modernity, Turkish modernity, which will rise from Anatolian culture, will become natural and mature over time. Aspirants to West and Western clones will gradually get rid of the losers complex and integrate into Turkish modernity. They will also start enjoying and sharing Turkish successes in every field with their compatriots. In short, they will return to their roots, and the schizophrenic social structure will start healing. In the new Turkish modernity, the ruler and the ruled, Dejrme and Rayaya, will unite in common values and social peace will be established. In that environment, there will be no need for the victorious Turkmen's hostility to the Dejrmes they defeated. Nevzat Tarhan offers some advice for the perilous situation we are in. Schizophrenia is a condition in which certain region of the human brain functions differently from another part. Same with the society where one group pursues certain goals and the other part pursues different goals. Hence, harmony in such society is disturbed and social schizophrenia settles in. Social schizophrenia is a feeling that can be taught. Just as clash of a person's feelings and ideas lead to schizophrenia, social schizophrenia occurs when different cultural identities clash in a given society. A further point was made by Hayrettin Karaman to the effect that our differences should be the factors of unity rather than being divisive. When social variation departs from its meaning of wealth, colors of beauty, the drives of the race for perfection, and the means of solidarity, and turn into walls dividing the society, it threatens the unity and integrity of the society, ending in the risk of the nation deteriorating, going backwards, and becoming divided. While at the beginning of the Republic, the Turkmen used to say, "The state is the state of Beyzades, children of Dejrmes." After the July 15th revolution, it was the Dejrme who lamented, "The state is gone. Islamist fanatics have taken over the state." Behind the public rhetoric, we are a country of traitors. We can perhaps look for the violence of class hatred. If the state is not mine, let it be demolished. Instead of Enver Pasha's soldiers entering Edirne, let Bulgarian enemy enter it. We can easily understand the alienation and resentment of the Dejrme losing power to the Turkmen, seeing they have no projects, dreams, or ideals for Turkey's future. They are so resentful and hopeless that they don't even need to think about Turkey's future anymore. Let's listen to Halil Inalcik. What a great exuberance echoed throughout the country when Mustafa Kemal Pasha took the podium and enthusiastically started addressing his people for the first time with the starting words, "Büyük Türk Milleti," Great Turkish Nation. Now, you can't understand retrospectively. Everyone was looking at each other in astonishment. There has not been a single ruler in these lands in the last 700 years who would start a speech by saying Turk. Imperial edicts would begin with, "O my servants, it is my command." The stone, soil, and plant of Anatolia were not accustomed to this embrace. It wasn't easy for the masses to get over the surprise address. In particular, the Dejrmes, who had been making their living around the palace for centuries, felt themselves put in front of the door. Some of them surrendered and accepted. Some of those who did not took on a religious or an ethnic identity and would embark on a long, stealthy struggle in the newly established state. Here's what Nietzsche says about the losers. Unsuccessful people who can't get what they want scream in anger, "Damn this world. If I can't get what I want, no one can get it. Let no one be anything." This disgusting feeling is the height of envy. Finally, the state now belongs to the people, and if someone says, "The state is not mine," his conscience may well justify betraying it. Media. Let us use the metaphor of a teenager for media. A bully tries to force him or her into illegal acts. He or she asks dad for help. Should dad help or do nothing about it? With no help, the kid collapses and yields. We talk of a free press. Is it really free, though? At a conference I gave at the Bourgeoisie University, School of Government and Leadership, I said that the press is free in the USA. Yes, it is free and unrestrained in the countryside. Anyone can say and write anything in minor papers and TVs. The system does not fear them and lets them free. Why? No impact, no serious threat to the system. In fact, this policy lets rural people let off steam, eases tensions while small, and prevents social pressure before it builds up. The same policies aim similar ends with liberal policies for rural street protests in the game of democracy. If not, social heat builds up and intensifies, and especially in economic crises, outbursts explode like a blocked pressure cooker. Then, the state has to take drastic action to reinstate law and order. Talking about democracy, how about the major media in the USA and Europe? Well, that's a different story. To become a manager or columnist in the mainstream media in Western nations, one must prove his loyalty to the system through harder trials than the intelligence chiefs of those countries. An author, without proving his loyalty and obedience to the system, and without developing his auto-control abilities against his noble instincts, cannot ascend to the towering ranks of the system. The Western main media is conformist, happy, and moves in sync with the conductor's baton. And Turkish main media? Wow, no conductor. Random commentators who don't know, nor realize where their words lead to. More sentimental, like many in Oriental media, than objective and calculated. Many copy and paste foreign news from international Western news agencies without filtering them through their national glasses, nor questioning the aim or manipulations they intend. Yet again, like in Western main media, one part of the national media is controlled by an international interest and obeys the baton of the global orchestra conductor. This is especially so for the media of the westernized descharmés of Turkey. When we say the international orchestra, we mean the cosmopolitan global, transnational capital, its media, so-called non-governmental organizations, and local business associations they control. If a state is indifferent to these foreign interests and behaves like the Kavat husband, then the press starts going to bed with foreign interests. But if a government starts to protect the freedom of its press from foreign blackmail and pressure, sues Turkish journalists in the service of foreign interests, bang, the orchestra starts. There is no freedom of the press. There is dictatorship. There is autocracy in Turkey. Many readers from developing countries shall remember their own countries having the same experiences. The most serious threat to developing countries is in the face of conditioning, manipulation, and brainwashing techniques. It is nearly impossible to respond to these accusations. There is only one panacea: an opposition with unwavering diligence against foreign interests and in full solidarity with the government. And for the government, it is a must to give its people the widest possible democratic field in cooperation with the opposition. Any anti-democratic measure shall be used by foreign interests, not because they love the Turk, but to use democracy and human rights as a political weapon against the Turk. Without widespread awareness, unity, and cooperation across the country, this critical threat cannot be stopped. People who have not yet reached the level of the nation-state would not realize that the threat to the state will hit their very individual interests, that the state is their state. Many a Turkish descharmé don't care anymore. And now, let's see how juntas made coups in Turkey. First, remember Ataturk's warning that the capitalists may synchronize their interests with foreign interests. It happened so. As capital accumulated, and some capitalists flourished, they saw the benefits of owning and controlling the media, like in Western countries. As they were in the same déjeuner league with junta generals, the naive children of the rural populations. They instigated generals with their sensitive points. Ataturk is being forgotten. Laicism is being destroyed. Islamist bigots are coming to power. And always the same slogan, and always the same slogan. Big business and its media knew it worked flawlessly every time. Then comes the People's Revolution, the Anatolian Revolution. The people seizing power from the déjeuner, not to give it back forever. They send junta generals to their barracks, not to ever roll their tanks against their own nation. Their leader, like the able husband, protects their media from foreign agents. And the orchestra starts again. There is no freedom of the press in Turkey. Translation: the press is not a mistress to Western interests. The West cannot prostitute it anymore. Erdogan, preventing the Western interests, is an autocrat. To repeat, I think the oppressed peoples of the world reading this book will identify with these lines and bitterly think that the same game is being played in their own countries. For the Western populace to realize, the developing world is awakening, especially the former colonial peoples. They started to understand the game. Westerners, however, are sound asleep and believe that their press is free and their governments are democratic. They also don't know where they are being led. They will wake up as their economic prosperity declines. Before wrapping up our chapter, let me share a memory from Chicago. When we met on various occasions, I used to chat with a well-known journalist in Chicago. At the time, I was interested in the decline of American share in the global economy and wanted to make a comparison of percentages as of post-World War II and 1990s. As we did not have ChatGPT then, I asked the journalist if he knew the ratio. His reaction, I cannot note here. He treated me like a spy who was trying to engage him. He may have been correct in behaving so. Intelligence officers often bait journalists and potential spies by approaching them with innocent questions. It turns out that U.S. intelligence trains or informs its journalists on counterintelligence techniques and enables them to develop automatic reflexes. I wonder, in which realm is our press and intelligence on these issues? Identity in the Republic. Ottoman Empire fell, and the déjeuner bureaucracy vanished as well. A rational political scientist wouldn't say anything like that. Officers and déjeuner bureaucrats, educated in Abdul Hamid II's schools, were the founders of the Republic. To repeat, the Republican founders were the unbroken continuation of the Young Turk and Union and Progress movement. Listen to Çetin Yetkin now. As the results of the municipal elections were coming in, Ataturk asked Hasan Riza Soyak which party had won. After he replied, "Our party," referring to the CHP, Ataturk said, "No, it's not like that at all. I'll tell you which faction won. The winner is the governing party, kid." Actually, they are the gendarmerie, the police, the district manager, the district governor, and the governors. Do note this. Ataturk's common sense, "How happy is the one who says I am a Turk?" was the answer to the identity problem occupying the minds of the thinkers of the late Tanzimat period in the early Republic. Just as we respect individual identity when a person says, "Call me by my name," we also respect the social identity of those who say, "I am Turkish." Turk is the one who says, "I am a Turk." We should accept those who separate themselves from this identity with respect too, and acknowledge the identity of whatever a person thinks of himself, whatever social group he sees himself belonging to. Within specific geographic boundaries, we refer to the broad umbrella at the top of the social, political, ethnic, religious, etc. identities. What is Turkey's dominant identity? Is it embracing enough? Under this umbrella, will sub-identities be able to coexist in harmony and peace with one another? Our hearts yearn for an answer to this question. A nation sits on a shared past, common lifestyle, and common ideals, real or imaginative. If these factors are powerful, inclusive, and in harmony, the nation will be strong. Otherwise, it will be weak. When we look at history for our common past, we see an ethnic structure that is heterogeneous by DNA, but has been harmoniously blended over a millennium. We may formulate it as a synthesis of two dimensions. First would be the horizontal synthesis, the ethnic mixing of nomads on horseback in the steppes before our entry into Anatolia. Then comes the vertical synthesis, settling in Anatolia and merging with its indigenous peoples. Except for some of our Kurdish citizens, those who have no problem with this ethnic mix say, "I am Turkish."